Welcome to Live and Work More Human. When you're here with us, you're part of the global community driving change. Each conversation is an invitation to grow, question, and co-create a future where people, business, and society flourish together. And we, Alexis and myself, Sally Clark, are here to guide you on this journey, connecting you to big ideas, bold conversations, and brave questions that will help you live and work more human every day. Today, we are speaking with the incredible Margaret Andrews, who is a seasoned executive academic leader, speaker, and instructor. She's created and teaches a variety of leadership courses and professional and executive programs at Harvard University. And she's also the founder of the Milo Center, a private leadership development firm. Her clients include Amazon, Citi, Continental, Walmart, Wayfair, and the United Nations. This was a really exciting and exploratory conversation. Lots of good questions. In fact, perhaps even more questions than answers, Lex. What was a real standout in terms of takeaways for you?
Yeah, I think for me, Sal, that one of the core tenets to really managing and leading yourself most effectively is understanding the space between your intention and your impact on others. I think so often when we step into leadership roles, we want to keep doing what we've always done because it's got us to where we are, but it's not necessarily the skills, and in particular the interpersonal skills, that's going to get us where we need to be. So that was a really important grounding and call to action for me. And how about yourself, Sal?
I think having her really unpack a lot of the learnings that she shares in her brilliant book, Manage Yourself to Lead Others, Why Great Leadership Begins with Self-Understanding, which is a title I think that makes a lot of sense to us, but to really sort of unpack that was really impactful for me. And I think she rounds out with these really powerful 6 questions that are they're going to live rent free in my brain, I think, for a long time.
Absolutely. It was a very practical conversation, but also one with some beautiful storytelling and real world examples. So there is a bit of everything for everyone. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. Before we dive into the full episode, here's a quick message from our podcast partners. What if every organization could deeply understand and optimize the potential of its greatest asset, its people?
Humanico blends cutting-edge insight with powerful organizational intelligence to give leaders a single, clear map of their people and how they thrive.
Cut through the noise of disconnected tools and surveys. Humanico brings it all together into one dynamic, intuitive platform, empowering better decisions, wiser strategies, and stronger teams, so humans and organizations flourish.
Humanico, putting people first at every level. To learn more, visit humanico.co/live and work more human. That's humanico.co/live and work more human. Welcome, Margaret. It is such a delight to have you with us today. We're so excited for our conversation. We'd love to start by exploring this notion that, so many of us, smart, talented, and ambitious people, we enter the workforce, if we eventually find ourselves in the position of leading others. But few of us are actually born with the skills we need to do this really well. What makes managing yourself so essential to being a great leader to others?
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And so really it's understanding and managing ourselves, right? So you have to first understand yourself and then manage yourself because you can't manage something that you don't understand. And so it is important because when we understand ourselves, we're more likely to put ourselves in positions where we're going to thrive. And also just to get to know ourselves, we're more grounded. We're less buffeted by every wind that blows. And so understanding ourselves, then managing ourselves toward what I say is the next level of us or the leader that we want to become. And so understanding ourselves helps us to understand other people, because if we don't understand ourselves, we can't really understand other people. And then managing ourselves helps us get better and shows we're role modeling for everybody else around us about how you get better.
Now, Margaret, can we get a little bit more sort of granular and explicit here? What exactly does managing yourself entail and what is it not?
Yeah. So Managing ourselves is I use a lot of questions and reflections when I teach and in the book and things like that. So I start off with people and I ask three questions. The first question is, what type of leader are you right now? And that is the words, the phrases that you would use to describe yourself as a leader, or what you think other people say about you when you're not in the room, or what you know they say about you because it's they told you, or it's in a performance review. So that's the first question, kind of baseline. The second question is about what type of leader would you like to become? What words and phrases would you like to be able to use, or would you want other people to use about you? And then that third question is about, okay, what's the delta? What's the difference between the first question and the third one? And paying in particular attention to behaviors that might need to evolve or skills that you might need to develop. So that's where we start with the managing ourselves, right? So super common ones. I want to learn to listen better. I want to delegate more effectively. These kinds of things. And so that's where we start with managing ourselves but it's toward a purpose, right?
Love that so much, Margaret. It's so interesting. In a lot of the consultancy work that Alexis and I do, we use this concept of intention impact gap. And it sounds like there's a lot of sort of similarities there because we can have all of the best intentions as a colleague, as a leader. But if we're not actually being very cognizant about what the actual impact is and trying to bridge that gap, we're never going to be the leader that we really want to be. So I love that you elucidate this kind of, it sounds like a very self-reflective approach to ensuring that we're really showing up in the way that we intend to as a leader.
Absolutely, because there is that a saying that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but other people judge us by our behaviors, which sounds very much like what you are talking about. And I find that a lot of times people they feel misunderstood. That I intend to be a great teammate or a great leader or something like this, but then somehow or other it's not translating, and they feel very misunderstood, and very oftentimes it's because those behaviors are not matching those intentions.
It's an interesting thing that you point out there, Margaret, this word misunderstood, because I think as an individual it can be quite a painful experience when we think that, we're showing up with kindness or we're listening or giving other people the benefit of the doubt and it's not being received that way. And in my experience, oftentimes that leads to more frustration, potentially even the seeds of resentment. And you tend to even double down on some of the unproductive behaviors that aren't giving you what you want, but you're not really sure how to get from where you are to where you want to be. Have you seen that with some of the leaders that you've worked with in this journey as well?
Absolutely. I think that
Yeah.
is exactly you kind of just nailed it, because it is one of those things that that people have been very successful in their career. They're high achieving people, right? So really smart, hardworking, maybe subject matter experts, etc. And so they find that when they're in a situation like this, that they just double down. They put more gas on, they put their foot on the gas. But the thing is that they're not getting traction. So they are really spinning their wheels in that way. And it's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for everybody around them. And I think a lot of times that's when I see people, when they come to my program, when they just say, I don't know what to do now.
It's such a great metaphor, I think, of that sort of like hitting the gas pedal and just like trying to push harder with what we've got rather than seeing that we perhaps need to slow down, maybe even shift gears or shift direction. And it's interesting because I can imagine at that point, we tend to think of leadership in the context of leading others. And some may even characterize this work as being selfish. We think, I want to be a servant in my leadership. It's really about how I can bring out the best in others. So for anyone who's thinking that this process of seeking self-understanding and then managing oneself is a sort of a selfish process, how would you respond to that?
I would say actually it's not selfish, it's kind. It's kind to yourself, and it is actually kind to everybody around you. And you kind of mentioned part of this just a second ago. I think that sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. and, just take a little break. I'm sure I'm sure this has never happened to you, but you're working so hard that you just can't you think, I can't slow down. I can't slow down. Right. But the best thing you can do is slow down, get a good night's sleep, go for a walk, these kinds of things. And it's very similar in leadership that people think, oh, yes, it's all about them. But actually, I think of it as an inside job. We have to go inside before we go outside. We got to fix this first, or understand this first, is really what I'd say.
It's such a powerful reminder, Margaret, because I do feel Sally and I were speaking, we're having this conversation at the end of a year, and it tends to be the time of the year where it feels like the hamster wheel starts spinning on double time. And it's a beautiful reminder that oftentimes we need to courageously step off that so we can get the perspective to say, okay, what is working? What's not working? Am I just following a plan? Or as a leader, can I step back and look at the macro picture here and the bigger strategy and sort of zoom out, if you will, and see what's working, what's not, and recalibrate on that. And that can be a really scary thing to do as well, especially when perhaps what has worked for us in the past has got us to where we are, but it's not going to get us to where we need to go.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole point, is that, we're not the same people that we were when we were 18 years old or 28 years old or whatever, even a few years ago, right? We change, we evolve. And so this is just another part of that evolution, but it is more intentional. It's kind of saying, where am I now? Where do I want to be? And therefore, what do I need to take care of? I'm going to say. And not that it's easy. If you've ever tried to make any type of behavioral change, we all know it's not easy, but what's the alternative? We're staying stuck where we are. So, sometimes you just have to put that in perspective, I think.
Such an important point, I think, Margaret, as well. And I mean, thank goodness we change, right? Where I look back and you mentioned like 18 and 28, and thank goodness I'm not the same person or leader that I was then. I think but it is something that often takes courage, because it's often a point of sort of discomfort that we reach when there is that sort of tipping point towards deeper growth, whether it's, as Lex referred to, this kind of like everything that I've been doing, which got me to where I am, suddenly that textbook isn't valid anymore. What do I do now? And when we don't necessarily have that path forward yet, it can feel quite scary. I'm curious, the leaders who you work with, is there sort of a commonality in the experiences that they're having that brings them to you?
Yeah, kind of. It's a spectrum, I would say, and but I think this happened in a classroom several years ago, and it was probably one of the most interesting things that I think has ever come up in a classroom. We were doing this case discussion, and it was about Dr. Ron Ventura, who is a fabulous, excellent surgeon with terrible interpersonal skills. And so we're taking the position of his boss, a hospital administrator, trying to figure out, what do we do with this guy? We keep him and try to coach him and get the benefit of these surgical skills? Or do we cut him loose because he's really causing havoc everywhere? And so it's a super impassioned discussion. And as we're kind of winding it down, I notice a hand that's raised in the back of the room. And it's James. And he hasn't spoken the whole 2 days we've been together. So, of course, I call on him. And he says, from the back of the room, he says, "I'm Dr. Ventura." And everybody turned, just like you see in a movie where everybody turns around at the same time. And then, of course, all eyes on him. He realizes what he just said. And he says, "Oh, I'm not the real Dr. Ventura." He said, "I'm an engineer, not a surgeon." But he said, pretty much everything else in that case could have been written about me. He said, "In fact, that's why I'm here." He said, "I was recently passed over for a promotion. And if I don't, get better at this leadership thing, I'm probably going to get fired." And first of all, it was probably the bravest thing I've ever heard said in a classroom. But what was super interesting was at the next break, everybody wanted to talk to him. And I thought, there's a lot of people here that fear they're Dr. Ventura, or maybe they know they are. And so those are actually, I do get people like that. I get people that are sent to my class as well. They want to fix it. They do want to fix it. And actually, I love working with people like that because they've been super successful throughout their career, and they have hit a wall and they don't like it. It doesn't feel good to hit that wall.
I think that's quite a compassionate view to take on it as well, Margaret, because from two sides of the coin here, I've worked alongside people like that who have this brilliant, very niche expertise skill set. And so they get away with a lot that potentially the rest of the team wouldn't, because their expertise is so relied upon and really difficult to replace. And then the other side of it is, I genuinely believe everyone wakes up in the morning and tries to do their best that day. And I think that's a really compassionate way of looking at those people, even though they really might be maybe frustrating you if you're having to manage them, or annoying the heck out of you if you're trying to play on the same team as them. It's a great way of inviting them into the conversation to actually do something about it. So that's such a wonderful example. And I want to sort of move towards this question now, Margaret, around what it's like to work for a boss who is great at managing themselves. And in your book, you have a best boss exercise. So perhaps maybe if we may ask, we could even run through an example of that. But could we start with the question, what is it like to work for a great boss or the best boss? And if we could, let's dive into the exercise.
Sure. Yeah. So, if you're listening, pull out a piece of paper and something to write with. And I ask people to think of the best boss you've ever had. It could be your current boss, could be the boss right before that. It could be the first boss you ever had. Doesn't matter. But it needs to be somebody that you work directly for, not a skip level, somebody, in the organization you wish you had worked for. Can't be a celebrity CEO unless you worked for them. And it can't be Ted Lasso, right? Because none of us have worked for him. So
We wish.
but yes, I get a lot of people say I'd like to work for him. But so it has to be somebody you've worked for. So usually it's not that hard for people to get one person in mind. Although I did have one person one time say, "Oh gosh, what if I've never had a good boss?" And I said, "Well, that's actually really sad. But think of the least bad one then, right? It's all relative." So once you've got somebody in mind, then I ask people. I say, think of all the reasons why you chose this person as your best boss. These are big reasons and small reasons, reasons that matter to everybody on the team, reasons that mattered only to you, right? Everything. And I say, go for a long list. And then this list can include tons of different things. They were the smartest person I've ever worked with, or, they were so good at search engine optimization, or they were the best at coding in R, or, right, all of these things, or they were great at conflict management, or they saw something in me, right? So there's, I've been doing this for a very, very long time, and I've heard loads of different reasons. So I ask people to try to get a decently long list. And if you have things like they were a great leader or a great communicator, I said, those are huge terms. You got to break those down to what you really meant. So then when you have a list of usually 8 or more, then I say the hard part is going back and picking the top 3. So it has to be exactly 3, not 2 and not 4. And this is where it gets hard because you really have to sift through them. So then once we get down to 3, then I tell people, listen, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I've done this with thousands of people across the world in every industry and, things like that. And that the reasons that everybody has almost always fall into one of 3 buckets. And the first bucket is around intelligence. The second bucket is around technical and functional skills, search engine optimization, coding, whatever it is. The third bucket is around interpersonal skills or relationship skills, soft skills, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And then I go back and if we have Post-it notes, I have them put them up on the wall in the right bucket. Or we do it a different way. And so what people see is when they go put them on the wall is that third bucket is way overweighted. It's always been that way every single time I've ever done it. And so several years ago, I thought, it is always the same, but what really are the numbers here? So I took down all those Post-it notes. I took them home. I created this big Excel spreadsheet over different audiences. And I found that on average, 85% of the reasons why somebody gives somebody as their best boss is in that third bucket around interpersonal skills. And that the remaining 15% on average is relatively evenly split between IQ and technical and functional skills. And what that's saying is not that IQ and technical and functional skills are unimportant, but really that they're the threshold skills. You have to have a certain level of those to get to where you are. But what makes the difference between a good boss and a best boss is those interpersonal skills. So, and it always works out that way.
It's such a fascinating exercise, Margaret. And it's interesting because as you were sort of explaining that bucket one and bucket two, it almost feels like the knowledge, the technical expertise are the pay to play entry. Like that's what you need to have to step into those roles. And it's really about how you connect and inspire and motivate people that takes you to that next level as a leader.
Absolutely, because it's those first two that got you where you are, right? I mean, IQ is super helpful in school and early in your career as you're learning all kinds of new stuff. And I mean, not that it's ever a bad thing, but the technical and functional skills, you have to get to a certain level for people would promote you. But what makes the difference is that third bucket, and that is where they all come out.
And it's interesting, Margaret, because I feel like I've heard also sort of stories of leaders who've been kind of parachuted in. I would describe these leaders as like very high IQ, but not necessarily having the exact technical background that a particular department has. But because of their incredible interpersonal skills, which they've obviously proven to sort of senior executives, they've been able to come into an arena where they don't necessarily have the technical skills, but because of that powerful combination of baseline intelligence plus all of those amazing emotional and interpersonal skills, they're able to create incredible outcomes and results and really, transform those parts of the organization.
Absolutely that is true, and I love those stories because they really show the success of the power really of these interpersonal skills. Because you're right, and many of us, I mean, I've managed groups that I didn't have their technical expertise, and you have to rely on them, right? But they have to trust you too, and you don't know what they're doing, so it is very interesting, but it's great because most of us in our career will end up managing people who we don't have that technical expertise. So the only thing you're right though, that intelligence helps there a lot too.
Now, Margaret, when you were speaking about some of these, the study that you conducted, I did have a boss that came to mind for me, and I wondered, could I share some of those skills with you? And
Please.
I'd love
Yeah.
to know how commonly you've seen these come up. So, the particular boss that I worked for was about a decade ago now, when I was working in local government in Australia, and I found him. I'll nominate him as my best boss for a few reasons. Firstly, he was wildly intelligent, and that to me was sort of in the space we were in at the time, kind of the benchmark for entry. So he had that in spades. But what I found most inspiring about him was three things. The first thing he did so well was united a team. Like we had very different skill sets, but we had such a clear collective vision and excitement about what we were achieving together, that we had this constant underlying motivation that came from that. So that was the first thing I think he did remarkably well. The second thing he did is he didn't micromanage us. And I know that might sound like a broad thing, but he could see that he had a team of experts working for him. And so he wasn't looking over our shoulder every day. He gave us the trust that we knew what we were doing and we were in the best position to execute on that. So that was another thing I saw him do. And the third thing is I really felt like my unique contributions to the team, my expertise and the culmination of experience was so valued and respected. And that for me was maybe the biggest motivator is I could see that he had a genuine care for us as individuals and a genuine gratitude for the way that we wanted to work, the way that our expertise showed up on the team. And I never felt like I had to conform to a particular way of working or a particular pigeonholed communication style. He was very open to us being individuals and bringing our expertise to the team. So I wonder, have you had, I'm sure you have, but how prevalent are those three in some of the research that you've done?
Very prevalent, actually. That sounds like a wonderful boss, and I always think that when you have a boss like that, you always want another one because that is such a peak experience. Like you can do things on a team and with a great boss that you are incapable of doing on your own. And so I think we spend a lot of time looking for somebody else like that because it was so great, which is a huge testament to them. But I would say yes, what you describe is very much spot on. So three of the top ones that always come up are things around trust, and this comes up with they didn't micromanage, they gave me a lot of autonomy, a lot of leeway, that kind of thing. The second one is around listening, that they listen and they hear. Right, that they're open to what you have to say, and then the third area is oftentimes around challenge in the sense that they developed you or whoever through a combination of challenging assignments and support, right? Because they knew that you could do it and they were going to stretch you that way. But actually, not far behind those is what people will say that they valued this person as an individual and not an employee, that they cared about them. Actually, one of my favorite little post-its that I pulled down on that one was somebody said, this person helped me grow and glow, and I thought that was such a great way to put it. But I think that's what so many people are really talking about. So the ones that you gave are actually, I think, your three were probably out of my three top five or so.
Oh, love it.
And I think it's that sort of stretch that you allude to, Margaret, that isn't so important because just for my part, the person that came to mind for me was Annemiek, who was my boss at a Japanese company I worked for in the Netherlands for a while. And the things very similar, I think, to what you had alluded to was really that sense of trust, that sort of real, that I hadn't experienced before, this real trust in my own intelligence and capabilities combined with the support to know that when I needed to check in with her with a question that she was there for me. And I think that sort of kind of almost seems like a paradox to have both, but it's a really lovely skill set.
It is a great paradox, if you want to call it that.
And I think also for me, one of the things, and I'm curious if you label this as an interpersonal skill, but she had incredible cultural awareness. So we worked with Japan quite directly, but we spent a lot of time in Sweden because our clients were there. And she was so good at being able to navigate and just really be with people. I think there was quite a genuine presence to her in how she was able to relate to people, irrespective of the cultural background. And I think that sort of patience, curiosity that she brought to it as well was really meaningful for me.
Well, yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, yeah, and it sounds like empathy, right? And treating people as individuals and not a part of, this is not a Swede and I have to treat them this way. This is not
Right.
somebody who's from the US and they have to treat them a certain way. We're all individuals and we have all of these components to us, but yet we're all very different.
Absolutely. And I love that because I think there's a through line of humility as well, which she absolutely had in spades. Now, thinking of all of these beautiful, and to my mind, these are very human characteristics. I'd love it if you could explain for us, Margaret. We're very much in an age of AI. We hear the term about 6 trillion times per day. We would love to hear from you, your perspective on the role, perhaps the importance of emotional intelligence for humans in this age in particular. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think that human skills are going to be more important than ever. That we need them. I mean, that is how we thrive as individuals, is face to face, person to person, and these kind of skills of empathy. So I think that, I mean, there's so much that we don't know yet about AI and how helpful it might be and also how hurtful it may be. And I think this is one of those things where it's going to be a yes and. I think when we hear about AI, we hear everything from this is going to be the best thing ever to it's going to kill us all. And I hope that, it doesn't get to that extreme, but there's going to be a little bit of everything. It's a tool, it's a technology, and it's going to be used however we use it. But I do think that the human skills are never going to go down in importance. And in fact, I think we need more of them now. And we see what happens when we don't have them. So yeah, it is more important.
It's a great point, Margaret. And it's interesting because Sally and I still hear a lot of organizations who want you to present a business case for developing developing these skills or training these leaders in a particular way. And it is interesting because there's a plethora of research that supports the need for this. But I wonder, can you perhaps help us pack that a little further, sorry. What do organizations stand to lose if we don't invest in training leaders in self-understanding and self-management?
There's a lot of research, a lot of it done by the Hogan organization. And the research dovetails quite nicely on the number 50%, meaning about half of all managers are somewhere along the continuum from ineffective to toxic, which is not a great place to be. And then so another research organization found that about 70% of us will have one pretty bad boss in our lifetime, and about 30% of us will have more than one. Right. So, and when you think about that and all of the people that that impacts, that's huge. You know, it comes in depression and anxiety and lost productivity. People bring it home from work and it, ruins their weekend and their family life and things like that. So it's bad. It's bad. It's also bad for the company because there tends to be higher turnover. If you want to find out, especially in the large organization, where some of those weak managers or toxic managers are, look for high turnover because there's usually higher turnover on that team. And so that costs organizations a lot of money, right? Because when somebody leaves, we've got to replace them. Other people are taking on their work. It's burning them out, right? So, all of these things. So it amazes me that we have to uh, uh, even argue that. If you've ever had a bad boss, which I think many of us have, you know how painful that is, and how it really can ruin your day, your week, your month, whatever. So yeah, it's pretty costly.
Absolutely, Margaret. And I appreciate you helping us unpack some of those organizational costs as well. And it was interesting. I was reading a piece of research fairly recently that was saying the most important relationship in your life might arguably be that with your direct supervisor or manager at work, because they are really the person you spend the most amount of time with, which is quite an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, you do. You spend a lot of time with people at work, whether it's your boss, your peers, your people that work for you, et cetera. I mean, we spend a lot of time. And also the other is that we spend a lot of time when we're not at work thinking about that. So, we don't just turn it off at 5 o'clock or whatever. We keep thinking about that.
I think it's a really important point, Margaret, and as someone who's researched burnout quite a lot as well, there's such a huge correlation between the quality of leadership that we experience and the level of chronic stress that we're under, which can often lead to burnout and other consequences. And I almost think there's something as particularly senior leaders, there needs to be perhaps a little bit of a courageous approach here, because without getting too meta, I think when we treat humans simply as resources or as capital to be sort of shifted around, we miss the point of how important and how multidimensional humans are, both as employees, as individuals, but certainly in that leadership context. And I think if we can start to see that it's not just, we need to not treat humans in the same way that we treat other forms of capital and resources within an organization. We invest differently. We know, as you alluded to, that, having them stay longer really adds so much value and reduces so much loss in an organization. There's such a flow-on effect to these investments made into leadership at individual and team and organizational levels. And I think also at a societal level, because we obviously take those experiences out of the door at the end of the day as well. They inform who we are as humans outside of work too.
Absolutely. And, the other thing is, think back to, earlier in your career. You probably still keep in touch with some people from, earlier jobs and things like that. And managers, I have a friend who was always a very good, she really enjoyed working with people and helping them get better, et cetera. So she was like one of those dream bosses. And but she told me that a lot of times she was known for being really a good manager and developing people. so people in the rest of the organization would sometimes hire from her group. And I said, well, doesn't that make you mad? You spend all this time developing somebody and then they end up, another part of the organization. And she said, oh no, she said, you're looking at this all wrong. She said, I work with people and I get them as good as they can be in my group. But then at some point, many of them are going to outgrow the work that they're doing. And when that's the case, she said, I want to find him another, position. And if it's within the company, great. If it's outside the company, fine. She said, I really, I'm really doing this for them. And so she said, and, there are benefits to this. She said, first of all, that people want to work on my team. When I have a job opening, people are fighting to get that job. But the other is that she said, I can get stuff done that no one else can get done. Because she said, when I, hit a roadblock, she said, I just pick up the phone and I call one of those people that used to work for me, and they're very grateful of what I did, and they will help. She said, whether it's in the organization or outside of the organization. So I thought that's such a great, she sees the benefit. And by the way, so did the organization.
It's such a deeply expansive and very human way to view your opportunity as a leader. And I think that's so often what we forget, Margaret, is many people get into a position of leadership and we can forget that it's not just about us. It's about how we can help those, as you say, grow and glow up. I think you mentioned grow and glow. It is such a beautiful thing, because when you as a human show that you have belief in the development of other people, that dividend will always come back to you tenfold in the future in a very human way. And so I think that's such a profound example to share with us. Now, Margaret, this conversation has been really expansive, actually, for both Sally and I. And I think you sort of tap into a few of the different sort of implicit mindsets around abundance and things like that, a curiosity that we talk so often about on the podcast. But I'd love if you could leave us with a parting message here. If there's a leader listening to this now who would like to begin their journey on managing themselves better so that they can become a better leader of other people, where would you recommend they start that journey?
I would recommend that they start with those 3 questions that I mentioned. What type of leader are you now, want to be, and therefore what do you need to do? But then there's a series of 6 questions that I have that take a lot more time. And I think that is the next step on it, because those 6 questions go to question 1, really about what type of leader am I now, right? They give you a lot more information. And those 6 questions very quickly are, who and whose thinking have influenced you throughout your life? What situations and events have perhaps changed your life? Lucky and unlucky accidents. Your personal definition of success in your personal life and your professional life, not your parents, not society's, yours. What are your core values? And I have a couple ways into that people might make it a little easier. The 5th is around, to what extent do you understand and feel your emotions? And if your answer is I'm not sure, then we do know that you probably don't, right? And then the 6th question is about what type of feedback have you received in your personal and professional life? And what's interesting is that this oftentimes points back to question 5, that the feedback we get is about how we impact other people. And it's oftentimes because we're not aware of our emotions and how we are impacting other people. So all of those are big questions, and it's kind of like a weird Venn diagram. Some of them bump up against each other.
The incredibly profound questions, Margaret. Can see these seating dinner tables and lunchtime discussions around the globe as people listen to this conversation and are inspired by your work to really delve in to this sort of self-exploration, self-understanding, so that we can manage ourselves and others better. Thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast. It's been such a delight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of Live and Work More Human. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, you can find all the details in our show notes or visit us at liveandworkmorehuman.com. We'll see you next time.